The hum of the airplane engine faded as I clicked open my inbox, my heart already weighed down by the overwhelming isolation of being deployed overseas. The distance, both physical and emotional, had already created an invisible wall between my husband and me. But nothing could prepare me for the email that lay ahead. Subject: it's over. I stared at the words, blinking as if they would disappear. They didn't. Dear Emma, I know this is the hardest thing for you to hear, especially from me and through an email, but I think you know it's the truth. I can't keep living this lie. I need to move on. I'm filing for divorce. I've also emptied our joint account, so you won't have to worry about that anymore. I know you'll be fine. I hope you understand, and I really do wish you the best. Goodbye. I felt the words sinking into my chest like a heavy stone. Each sentence pulled me deeper into the quicksand of despair, suffocating me. The numbness that followed was a strange mix of shock and disbelief, as though my mind refused to process what I had just read. I closed my eyes, willing the reality to change. But when I opened them again, the email was still there, staring at me, cold and unforgiving. I hadn't seen this coming. Sure, things had been tough for a while, but I never imagined that this was how it would end. There had been silence, yes. There had been tension, but I had thought, no, I had hoped, that we were still in it together. I was wrong. I was stationed in a remote base overseas, in a country I barely knew, surrounded by unfamiliar faces and constant danger. I had always thought of my marriage as my anchor. My husband, Daniel, had promised me that we would make it through this separation. He had promised me that he understood the sacrifices I was making. He said he would be patient. He said he would support me. But instead, he had made his decision without me, while I was here, alone. The truth stung, like the sudden blast of cold air in the middle of a summer afternoon. I knew, deep down, that our relationship had been deteriorating. But this was a betrayal of a magnitude I never imagined. He had robbed me, not just of love, but of my trust, my security, and my sense of self-worth. I wiped away the tears that had begun to gather in my eyes. I had no one to talk to here, no shoulder to lean on. The people I worked with were strangers, focused on their own survival, their own worries. I was nothing more than a soldier to them, another cog in the machine. But to Daniel, I had been his wife, his partner, his equal. At least that's what I had thought. The man who had once sworn to cherish me had now reduced me to a mere afterthought, an inconvenience. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. The thought of the money, our joint account, gnawed at me. The savings we had built together, the plans we had made, now gone. Gone in an instant. All of it taken by the person I had trusted the most. The person who had sworn to stand by me, through thick and thin. I couldn't understand it. He knew how hard I worked here, how far I was from home, how much I was sacrificing, and yet, instead of supporting me, he had betrayed me in the cruelest way imaginable. Not even a phone call, not even a conversation, just an email. A single email, with no explanation, no remorse. I sat there, in the small, dimly lit room that was my temporary home. I had a mission to complete, lives depending on me, and yet here I was, paralyzed by the weight of this crushing emotional blow. How could he do this to me? The question echoed in my mind, over and over, as I stared at the screen, willing myself to make sense of it all. But it didn't make sense. There was no answer that could fill the void he had left. No justification for his actions. Nothing that could take away the sting of his betrayal. I glanced around the room, feeling the suffocating weight of my own thoughts. The walls were closing in on me, and I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to cry out in anger, to demand that he explain himself. But the silence around me was deafening, and the cold, impersonal glow of the screen only made it worse. What do I do now? The question lingered in the air like a dark cloud. I felt so small, so helpless, so far away from everything I had known. I had always been strong, had always prided myself on my resilience. But this was something else. This was the kind of betrayal that broke you, that shattered everything you thought you knew about love and trust. I tried to focus. I tried to push the emotions aside and think about what I needed to do next. There were lives at stake here, people depending on me. But how could I think about anyone else when my world had just been torn apart? How could I concentrate on the mission when my heart was in pieces, scattered across the screen in front of me? As the hours dragged on, I found myself scrolling through old pictures of Daniel and me. Our wedding day, our vacations, the moments that had once filled my heart with joy. It felt like another lifetime, a dream that had slipped away while I wasn't looking. I wanted to reach out to someone, anyone. But who? My family? My friends? How could I explain this to them? How could I tell them that the man I had trusted, the man I had built my future with, had not only left me but taken everything we had worked for? I felt the anger bubbling up inside me, rising like a tidal wave, threatening to overtake me. But beneath it, there was something deeper, something darker. A quiet despair, a hollow emptiness that I couldn't shake. I had been abandoned, left to pick up the pieces of my life alone, in a foreign land, with no one to turn to. I wiped my eyes again, pushing the tears back. I wasn't going to fall apart. I couldn't. Not here, not now. There were still things to be done. There were still people who needed me. But I couldn't ignore what had just happened. I couldn't ignore the fact that my husband had divorced me by email, drained our joint account, and left me with nothing but the echoes of his betrayal. And deep down, a voice whispered in the back of my mind, I will not let him get away with this. Days passed, but the weight of the betrayal didn't ease. It lingered in my chest, a constant reminder that the man I had loved was no longer the person I thought he was. He had stolen not just my savings, but my trust, my sense of security, and my belief in love itself. I woke up each morning in a haze, the early hours of the day filled with a dull ache in my heart. The quiet of the room seemed to reflect my soul, empty, broken. But I was here, in this foreign land, with a mission that could not wait. I had to find a way to survive this, to rise from the ashes of my own despair. But how? At first, I tried to throw myself into my work. I buried my head in the demands of my job, hoping that the physical exhaustion would dull the pain. I tried to focus on the faces around me, my team members, my colleagues, but it wasn't the same. There was a distance between us, a wall I couldn't break through. I couldn't talk to them about this. I couldn't tell them how I felt. How could I explain to them that I had been left behind, betrayed by the one person who was supposed to stand by me, no matter what? I tried to keep moving, to keep functioning, but each step felt heavier than the last. One evening, as I sat alone in my room, scrolling through my phone to distract myself, I found something I hadn't expected. An email from my lawyer. I had contacted him days after the divorce papers arrived, too stunned to take immediate action. But now, I had no choice. My lawyer's message was brief, yet it struck a chord deep within me. We can start the legal process to reclaim what's rightfully yours. The money, the property, everything you've worked for. But it's not going to be easy. For the first time since that email, I felt a spark of something other than despair. It wasn't anger, though there was plenty of that. It wasn't sadness, though that too had filled my heart. No, it was a quiet strength. A small but persistent voice inside me that said, "You deserve better." I began to take action, slowly at first. I gathered the necessary documents and reached out to the financial institutions, determined to track down the money my husband had stolen. I worked with the legal team to understand my rights, to build a case, to find a way to get back what was mine. Every small victory, every email, every phone call that brought me a step closer to justice felt like a breath of fresh air. The fog of helplessness began to lift, just a little. And in those moments, I began to remember who I was before the betrayal. I was Emma, not just Daniel's wife, not just the woman who had been left behind. I was a fighter, a woman who had built a life for herself, who had dreams and ambitions that had nothing to do with the man who had walked away from her. A week later, I received a call that would change everything. It wasn't from my lawyer, nor was it related to the legal proceedings. It was from a former colleague of mine, a woman who had once worked alongside me in a different unit. We had shared war stories, laughed together in the break room, and, at times, cried over the toll our work had taken on us. She had been a friend, a true friend. Even if we hadn't spoken in months, she had heard about my situation, and she reached out. "You're stronger than you think, Emma," she said softly, her voice steady. "You don't have to face this alone. We'll help you get through it. You've already done so much for everyone else. Let us help you now." Her words resonated in me. I realized that I wasn't alone. Not really. There were people out there who cared about me. People who saw the strength in me even when I couldn't see it myself. In that moment, I made a decision. I would fight. Not just for the money, not just for the property, but for my own dignity, for my own sense of worth. I would rise above this betrayal. I would heal. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal battles, financial negotiations, and emotional healing. I didn't win every battle, but I fought hard. Every time I felt the old doubts creep in, every time the urge to collapse into despair whispered in my ear, I reminded myself of who I was. I wasn't just a victim of betrayal. I was a woman reclaiming her life, piece by piece. One day, as I sat in the lawyer's office, reviewing the settlement documents, I looked at the papers before me, not with anger, but with a sense of calm. The settlement wasn't just a victory over Daniel. It was a victory over everything I had ever feared. It was proof that I could rise from the ashes of my own pain. The money, the house, the assets, they didn't matter to me anymore. What mattered was that I had reclaimed my strength, my independence, and my sense of self. And that was something no one could take away from me. As the final papers were signed and the deal was sealed, I walked out of the office with my head held high. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was moving forward, not just in the legal sense, but in life. I was free. Months later, when I returned home, I found myself in a place I had never imagined I would be, stronger, more confident, and more at peace than I had ever been. My heart had healed, not because of the settlement or the legal victory, but because I had learned to let go of the past. I had learned to forgive, not for him, but for myself. I had learned that my happiness was not in the hands of anyone else. Daniel's betrayal had been the catalyst for my rebirth. It had broken me, yes, but in breaking me, it had given me the opportunity to rebuild myself from the ground up. I was no longer the woman who had been left behind. I was Emma, and I was whole. And so I moved on. The end.